Hi everyone and welcome to ThursDev. Today I'd like to tell you a story about some demons in a maze on Mars and how they irreversibly reshaped the landscape of video gaming. So Doom came out last week. By all accounts, it's a fantastic game and one can expect that it's going to do financially very well for ZeniMax and id. As I write the script for this video, I'm watching a number of my friends on my Steam friend list launch the game and go straight into it. I haven't been able to pick it up and play it for myself yet, but most if not all of the news that I'm hearing about it is pretty good. And I'm happy to hear that. I'm always glad when the resurrection of a series that is personally significant to me goes well. It was a big deal for me back when Fallout was revived by these very same people, ZeniMax and their subsidiary Bethesda Softworks, and they were also responsible for the most recent Wolfenstein games, which I heard were also pretty good as well. So good job guys, 3 for 3, and I'm very interested in seeing where you go next. But today, in honor of the release of Doom and any other number of first-person shooters, I thought I'd take a quick look at the history of first-person shooters and how they've evolved over time through the lens of the Doom series and their creators id. You can probably trace the first-person shooter back as far as sometime in the mid-1970s, but most recognize the grandfather of the FPS to be Wolfenstein 3D from 1992, created by id Software, a small software house known for its many shareware titles, most notable of which being the PC platformer Commander Keen, published by Apogee. The team was led by creative lead Tom Hall, along with its programmers John Romero and John Carmack, and the surprisingly unrelated artist Adrian Carmack. Beginning something of a pattern of innovation by id Software, it used a fairly revolutionary technology called ray casting that allowed it to draw a series of lines from the camera's perspective towards a grid of blocks that represented its map, and to render a column of pixels where it should appear in real space, creating the illusion of 3 dimensions. By no means was Wolfenstein the first game to utilize this technology. Honestly, it wasn't even near it, but games that used the first person's perspective tended to be slow, cumbersome, and a little difficult to control. John Carmack, who created the engine that Wolfenstein 3D ultimately ran in, credited his inspiration to the first-person role-playing game Ultima Underworld: The Stygian Abyss, an action role-playing game, but he believed that he could take the technology that it had used and improve upon it, making it faster and more responsive. He was ultimately successful in this, and Wolfenstein was born. Unlike 3D games of today, all of the three-dimensional aspects of the game were merely smoke and mirrors, and truly everything within the game was 2D sprites rendering on screen using a process that's now emulated in 3D games called billboarding, which uses a two-dimensional image and always adjusts its positioning so that it's facing towards the camera. When done correctly, this is a very subtle effect, which you may not even notice, though it's still prevalent in 3D games in the rendering of things like leaves on trees. With the runaway success of Wolfenstein 3D, the bar was set very high for id's next project, which became the first game in the Doom series. An ultra-violent sci-fi shooter based on the moons of Mars, where a portal to hell had opened up and demons were streaming through. If the Nazi imagery of Wolfenstein 3D had been considered edgy, Doom was downright controversial. There were many people who spoke out against the satanic imagery that the game contained, netting it the distinction of being one of the first games to receive an M rating from the ESRB when it made its console debut, putting it in the then rare class with some other controversial titles like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap. Its fast-paced, ultra-violent style was something that, though not unheard of, was certainly never thrust so far into the mainstream before. The rise of the FPS saw a major shift in popularity from the previous leader in the game space, the adventure game, and its narrative-heavy experiences, over to a more frenetic, action-packed style that persists to this day. It was an exercise in mostly mindless, skill-based combat, and story, when there was one to speak of, was entirely presented in snippets of text between entire chapters of the game. Of course, this shift in storytelling was also a point of contention between camps of game developers, even within id. While lead designer Tom Hall was hell-bent, pun intended, on injecting a creepy narrative into Doom to counterbalance the emotionless killfest that was Wolfenstein, that was shot down by tech lead John Carmack with his famous quote, "Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important." And quickly he was proven right, at least for the infant genre. FPSs were the right environment for tech-first game experiences, and because of this, FPSs quickly rose to a place of dominance during the mid-1990s, with a sequel to Doom, and quickly followed in 1996 by even more technologically advanced Quake, which eschewed the sprite-based style of its predecessor in favor of more full 3D, a technological advancement that would pave the way for many games to follow and set the pace for the genre of games that we know as first-person shooters today. FPSs saw the introduction of many innovations in game technology, much like adventure games before them, including the surprising but ultimately lauded introduction of one of the first games to boast being exclusively online-only competitive gameplay in its 1999 sequel to Quake, Quake 3 Arena, which completely did away with story-based gameplay entirely, perhaps a natural progression after the eventual resignation of Tom Hall and John Romero from id due to creative differences, as John Carmack recognized that ultimately players seem to enjoy killing one another far more than even solving puzzles and killing monsters in mazes. And while traditionally a PC mainstay, FPSs managed to even take the console world by storm with the still fondly remembered 007 GoldenEye on Nintendo 64 by introducing an auto-aim feature to compensate for the innate inaccuracy of the controller. In this environment were spawned some of the highest-grossing video game franchises of all time, Call of Duty and Battlefield by Activision and EA respectively, but with success, and in a genre where there was very little space for narrative and therefore moral stories, comes controversy. Doom, with its demonic themes and unrepentant violence, sparked the still ongoing debate as to whether violent video games and emerging virtual reality technology would lead to the creation of graphic and disturbing murder simulators, as they were often referred to, which ended up being a favorite catchphrase of worst lawyer ever Jack Thompson into the mid-2000s. This was exacerbated by the scapegoating of Doom and games of its ilk when it was found that the shooters of the Columbine Massacre of 1999 were fans of it and many other games in the same genre, like most other children of their age. The entire debate about violence in video games became such a hot talking point in the mid-90s and into the 2000s that even big-name politicians like the current Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton felt the need to step up and publicly take a stand against and attempt to even ban video games during the course of their careers. Of course, despite attempts by activists like now disbarred lawyer Jack Thompson, misguided anti-games politicians like Clinton, and proposed legislation like her Family Entertainment Protection Act, which was ultimately shot down by Congress, the genre persevered and even thrived. Studies both for and against the violence in video games theory have been published ad nauseum over the years, but no amount of negative media pressure seemed to be able to stem the powerful tide of the first-person shooter. Since 1992's Wolfenstein 3D, more than 700 FPS games have been commercially released across most mainstream platforms, and they show absolutely no sign of ever losing their momentum. But in this booming Wild West of FPS game development, as quickly as it had exploded into the limelight, id faded away into relative obscurity. The other half of id's founding members, John Romero and Tom Hall, had laid down new roots in their own new studio, Ion Storm, which, despite a very unfortunate hiccup in the 3-year delay of their planned first project, Daikatana, developed the classics Deus Ex, Anachronox, and Thief, Deadly Shadows, each well regarded for their involved stories and in-depth world building, an ironic twist and a sign of the maturing of the FPS genre on the whole. There were a good 5 years between the release of Quake 3 Arena and Doom 3, a departure from id's stance on anti-narrative action games and uncharacteristically story-heavy depiction of hell-torn Mars. If you'd like a taste of what Doom 3 had become, we also have done a Let's Play on the first half hour of the game on our channel, which will be linked down below. Shortly thereafter, however, id again disappeared into the metaphorical wings of game development, as John Carmack's studio focused instead on developing technology. Ion Storm also eventually closed, in part due to the inability to fully recover from the damage done by Daikatana's delays. Despite the fading away of the genre's progenitors, however, FPS was here to stay, and here we are today. The FPS genre has evolved in amazing ways since the days of Wolfenstein 3D and the Doom of the early 1990s, but it seems that finally there's a place once again for a game that is essentially a love letter to the bygone days of this silly, ultra-violent gore fest that Doom once was, and now is once again. And it probably won't contribute to the video game landscape in the way that it once did, but it has captured the hearts and minds of many who maybe want another chance to relive the glory days of fighting pink demons in mazes. Thank you very much for watching this week. I hope that you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane, and I also sincerely hope that you'll join us again soon. Until then, though, enjoy your time knee-deep in the dead, because those big pink demons aren't going to be going and killing themselves. Take care.